we center the student as you described. We center the students. We help our students succeed, but we cannot have our students thrive without our community thriving, without our schools thriving, and certainly without our families thriving. And so, how do we set the conditions to help our families thrive? We have to lean in on the gifts and the assets and their passions that they bring to the schools. We need to make sure that we know our families by by name, by story, um, cultural relevancy, and then ultimately, how do we engage our families in the business that we're in schools, which is helping the teaching and learning, helping our students be successful academically, social, emotionally, in a classroom space in the schools. How do we bring in our families and connect them to the teaching and learning? Uh, that's the conditions that we as schools should set, we aim for to help our students thrive. Yeah, I love talking about, I know the shiny toy that a lot of folks are talking about is this idea of community schools. But really behind that the work or that approach is starting with our assets and starting with the wealth of knowledge and experience that our community brings. And again, students, families, staff, community members, all of that. But we're zooming in on our familial capital and what they bring. And so, that brings forth, again, the culture, their language, their traditions, what they, value in the community that we serve in our schools. And so this framework, community cultural wealth, is a great way. And this is Tara Yoso's community cultural wealth model. So shout out to that work. We speak to this as we introduce the assets and needs process with when we talk about that with our schools. We talk about, think about the community that we serve and their social capital. Think about the network of people and the resources that our communities have and bring. When you walk through the community, think about the linguistic, intellectual and social skills that those communities that, depending on where we serve, bring, and how do they navigate some of the challenges, some of those institutional challenges, but that brings forth some skill set that perseverance. Again, resistance capital, aspirational capital, and then on the bottom there is that cultural knowledge, nurtured among our family, and however you define family, that carry a sense of community history, memory, and cultural institution. So all of that community cultural wealth, it lifts up our families. Again, when we think about our community as strengths and asset base, and we bring that in intentionally into the classroom spaces. And part of in the state of California, we're talking about the standards for the teaching profession. Our teachers are asked to bring that into the classroom, not as if you have a chance to, but it's expected that we do that. And that is certainly a strength that we want to lift up and share with, and this helps us build capacity in our community structure. Many different ones. I hope we can bring up a video that I want to highlight. So one of the things that we do is, how do we create these experiences, these performance-based experiences, where we ask our students in an English class, and this is an English class, but you can take whatever content and through the lens of that assets and needs process, bringing in the students' passions and interests. How do we leverage who they are as individuals? Do they see the students, themselves in the content? And how do they bring in their cultural wealth into the classroom to share with others what they're proud of? Again, an English class, you can do this. In a social studies class, you can talk about, things like an I am poem, a yo soy poem, where they talk about their experiences over time. This one in particular was a ninth grade English class where they created an opportunity to bring in their connection of culture. And this one is entitled Like a Belt.
My mom holds her accent like a belt, with one strong hand, her mouth all buckled hinge between her lips unfastened as she speaks, her chest high and proud. She speaks a concoction of Spanish and English dead set against one another. There's no telling my mama she wrong. She don't know wrong. Her voice is savory and sweet, and you best not tell it to hush. She worked too hard for too many hours and too many years for her voice to come. Her Spanglish turns words such as interesting into interesting, and for example to for example, and this, these, and thus all sound the same to her. My mom doesn't say okay, she says va, and suddenly the tornado in her mouth becomes a Ricardo Arjona song. Her tongue can't lay itself flat enough for the American language. It's got too much curve, too much bone, too much cumbia, too much salsa, too two-step, got too many guitar strings in between her teeth. It's got too much llave, too much strike, got too much pico de gallo to sit still. It be an anxious child wanting to make Play-Doh with the mud on her streets. English is too tidy for her kind of wonderful. Her words flooding conversations between women whose hands are all they got. Sometimes our hands are all we got, and our mispronunciation of the English language reminds us of how we are still bella, still buena. Say buenas tardes and a stranger becomes an hermano. Say que onda and a crowd becomes your family. My mom's tongue is a cable from her pueblo, decorated with bailes from her barrio. So even if her lips can barely stretch themselves around English, her accent is a broken clock, always pointing to 12, when her papi's voice echoed, A comer! From the kitchen to the warmth of her bed.
When I was principal at South Junior High, the first thing we focused on, this was years ago, was that chat question. How do you feel welcomed? When our families came into the office, what's the first impression that they feel? And if they do feel welcome, they'll continue to lean in, they'll continue to be included, they'll continue to feel like they're invited in and welcome. And then you start having authentic, real conversations with our loved ones, with our families, with our community. And then we get into real deep trusting environments where they can share with us how we can do better for them. And that whole process is really the first step of learning and listening deeply. That idea of assets and needs starts with listening deeply in a deep way. You got to have trust. You got to be able to set the conditions. And when you feel the welcome, you lean in and you continue to be authentic in your this key move is the start of capturing that street level data that Shane Safier, Jamila Dugan talks about in her street data book, right? If you haven't read that street data book, phenomenal. This is really relationship, the assets and needs is a relationship centered. That's what this is about. It's about relationships. How do you create trusting environments? How do you uplift those families? And then how do you create from that listening deeply that data that will then begin to uncover, the root causes of perhaps structures that, nobody's fault, systems and structures that are setting the wrong conditions to be able to help our students thrive with our families supporting them at home. And so that's first step, that key move that I would, want to lift up, Alexa, is that listening deeply through that assets and needs process. Let's see here. I'm gonna go back to South, and I'm gonna show. I'm gonna fail forward if we can. So I leaned in on listening to our families, and at the same time, it was trusting environment. We created these cafecitos, and in the cafecito, there were people having conversations, and the families were super excited, and they're like, "Mr. Hernandez, I would love if I can go into the classrooms to just learn how students are learning so I can support learning at home." And I was like, great, this was, 10 years ago. I was like, what a great idea. Oh my gosh. We have families that want to learn about what's happening in the classroom. I had to have an emergency staff meeting because I missed a few steps. Now we got to, now we talk about setting the conditions and creating trusting environments. Like we did that with our families, but I moved too quickly. Now we got to make sure we set the conditions for our staff as well. So that emergency staff meeting was all things like, well, how on earth are we ready for this? Tell me what you mean. And there were some comments that were like, oh, okay, we're not ready for that. So fast forward, we definitely, with our association, with our union, we said, what can we do to learn from each other and open up classrooms so we know it's non-evaluative and, in an unbiased lens. Ultimately, the families want to support learning at home. They want to help us teachers, yay. but we had to make sure we took the right steps. So failing forward, that's the one example that I want to, create is that, or share with you all, that the listening deeply, we want to make sure that we also uncover what needs to happen before we move too quickly without the right folks in the room. I mean, examples, but also I really want to talk about the system in which you create those examples across your community. You mentioned, these families that aren't engaged, and the assumption is they just don't care or are disengaged for whatever reason, but sometimes they're uninvited, right? And so how do we invite them in intentionally? And you guys are nailing it. I love this, that we go to them. And we go to them not because their kid, again, their student is not coming to school, their student's a behavior issue, or we're doing a welfare check. No, we're going to you because we want to hear from you, because we're missing your voice, because we cannot figure out how to be successful in our schools without you, mom, dad, student, right? And we ask them, what are your hopes and dreams for your son or your daughter? And from that, they won't, if they're giving us this real authentic, voice and response, then what are we going to do with that? That piece of deeply listening is creating the, patterns and trends of uncovering systemic, root causes of what we're doing wrong, so we can better, engage those families that are not invited in because the system has failed, right? And as we uncover that, then we find families that want to lean in, that want to be part of this work, that want to then be a part of the solution. And fast forward, and I'll talk about this cycle in a minute, fast forward, those families are the ones that become the biggest leaders on our campus. They are the ones that become our parent leaders. They are the ones that then bring their comadres, their compadres, their neighbors that haven't been invited in, and they leverage more, engagement in families than we do, people in ties behind the desk, because they have those relationships in the communities that they're a part of. That's they feel the empowerment, right? We go from parent involvement all the way up to empowerment, and that's where we want to live. We want to live in that empowerment phase. And so this cycle of continuous improvement, again, Shane Safir in her work around street data talks about this equity transformation cycle. And the first root step is that deeply listening. How do you deeply listen? Well, there's some examples here. I mean, and these are examples, and I'm sure you have others. Surveys, community mapping, community voice circles, the hopes and dreams, which is what we describe when we go, for whatever reason, we're going to them to uncover their hopes and dreams, to invite them in and to create, how do we uncover that second step? And so now we're looking at some data, some street data points, really powerful street data that we get, more so than just living in the survey. Again, survey is a good place, but then we go deeper with maybe a small group, a focus group. We call those community voice circles of students, of families, of staff, of business, of community partners, to then be able to understand what are those patterns and trends, to be able to then maybe we go back to deeply listening, because we're finding some patterns, but we're going to go back. And as we go back and forth, as you see the arrows, we are able to then take that next step, which is to reimagine the way we've been working with our families, our community, to be able to move in a way that's going to create amazing experiences for our students, our families, our staff, and our community. Yeah, this last part, this second part it gives you kind of the example. So as you deeply listen, as you uncover and you go back and forth in that, then you make, again, we're in the business of helping our classrooms transform by the street data, by the uncovering of data from our community, to be able to create examples that our students are proud of every day, every period. You saw the young lady do that with her poem. Our students become engaged in what they're passionate about, and now the sky's the limit. They're going to City Hall and they're asking for things about housing, about what they want, which is experiences of internships. They're asking for things that they're passionate about. Our families are doing the same thing. This equity transformation cycle is relevant for our students, our families, and our staff as we move into civic engagement, which is the moving part. And it's that cycle of improvement, of going through that multiple phases. That cycle is, again, you may go back a little bit, but you go forward to be able to continue in the reimagining and in the move. So the scope and sequence, and as you see there, that's an example of it, and I think we'll have the actual document somewhere in one of our resources. But this is our guaranteed experience that our families will have at every one of our schools. Give or take dates. But when we come in back in July, welcome back, families. We're going to talk about orientation to ensure that you're successful in our schools. We're going to ask you to look at the assets and needs process, because we need to hear your voice, because we cannot do the work of itself. Welcome back to professional learning, where our staff will learn about family engagement, right? As we go through the year, we experience similarly, where regardless of whether we're at a junior high or high school, east or west coast, in our east or west in our district, we are experiencing that. And it's not just family engagement is not the responsibility of one person. You're a family engagement specialist. It is a responsibility of our family engagement, our principals, our teachers, our counselors, our custodian, right? It is a collective system, and that's what the team members show you who's facilitating, but who's supporting, right? It's the work of our collective school that makes family community engagement, thrive, the conditions that we set. So this scope and sequence is our guaranteed experience that our families will have, again, regardless of what school. The parent learning walks, we don't have a rubric. What we have is a way to reflect when we're in the classroom. There's reflective questions that our parents go through. And remember, it's a rubric, feels evaluative, and this is non-evaluative. So what we're saying is, as you're walking in, we give them an orientation before our families walk into the classroom. It's about 30 minutes of orientation. Our principals facilitate. Again, principals pause what they're doing, because this is super important to support family engagement through parent learning walks. A 30-minute orientation on what is the teaching and learning look like now. We describe our framework around the community schools career preparedness systems framework, which talks about student agency, student voice, and 21st century skills. For us, it's the 5 C's: collaboration, critical thinking, communication, character, compassion, and critical thinking. I think that's the one that I forgot there. So as we ask our families to walk into the classrooms, what they're observing on the walls, what the students are doing, what the presentation is, what the assignment is what is what are you seeing that is lifting up the 5 C's? What are you seeing that how are students are learning? Right. So then we go outside of the walls of the classroom and we debrief. What did we see? What did we learn? And the second question, which is really important, is how does this support my role as a parent, as a mom, dad, guardian at home? So my conversation with my student is going to be very different. I'm not going to ask him, how was your day? I'm going to ask him, I went to a parent learning walk and I saw that in the classrooms, you guys are learning about how to be critical thinkers. Can you give me an example of today, of what you did today that lifts up critical thinking? Can you share with me an example of how you collaborated with someone today? How were you compassionate? How were you compassionate? How do you show kindness? And so that's what we're asking our families to do to support learning through that dialogue. So insights from our families and our students. Imagine if our students are providing this similar insights, and then we bring it to professional learning spaces, and we ask our teachers, to reflect around what the street data is uncovering for us, right? What are we seeing? We're seeing, hey, we're being affirmed by the culture, the environment, the welcoming environment. Awesome, great job, everybody. Hey, wondering if we're making it clear or intentional that we should be spending more time on collaboration through the lens of student voice. Our student voice, it seems as though we're not giving them enough examples, right? Like, we can get defensive, but what Shane Saphir talks about in the street data is be comfortable with that uncomfortable, be courageous in looking at on the insights. And it's not for us to be defensive, it's for us to create systems that better, show evidence of our vision. Our vision is to create these thriving students through the 5 C's, and apparently we missed the boat in these examples. And we can start with one teacher, we can start with a department, we can do it school wide, and our campuses themselves are in different places. But we are asking, fast forward, we're asking students as well, 5 questions every quarter and asking them to give us the insights. And that's great, but you mentioned it, professional learning. If we can take the insights from our families and from our students and use it for professional learning, like that's the place. That's where transformation is going to happen.